Okay, so this is chapter 55 of The Night Singer. Monday, May 20th, 55. It was just before 7 when Hannah reached the overturned rowboat on the beach at Kelva. The sky above the Kalmar Strait was clear and blue, the temperature already 12 degrees. She hadn't checked the weather forecast, but it looked like the heat was on its way. Surprised parents would be pleased, though perhaps the early Swedish summer still felt like winter to them. Hannah had gone into the station yesterday, primarily to pick up her car. Since none of the others from her group were there, she had driven straight back to Öland, taking a detour through both Gardby and Mockelmosen. She had been hoping to find Fanny, but the girl seemed to have gone up in smoke. Whenever she called, she went straight through to voicemail. Hannah had spent the afternoon with Ingrid, who had come over to see how she was doing. The rain had been torrential, so they had sat on Hannah's little porch and enjoyed it from there, drinking tea and eating Ingrid's homemade biscuits. For the most part, they had talked about Ingrid. She was anxious because her son had called this morning and suggested she moved into retirement housing. He thought she was no longer capable of looking after herself. Ingrid had also touched upon the grief that she found harder to put into words, that time was marching on. Having a neighbor Hannah enjoyed spending time with was a huge change from Stockholm. Back there, it had never occurred to her to try getting to know her neighbors. As evening approached, Hannah realized that she had forgotten to call Rebecca and sent a message saying she was thinking of her. Not a word about the investigation, about Fanny Broberg or Marcus Johansson, the 43-year-old man who may have exploited Joel's insecurities and struggles. Did Rebecca know they had searched Fanny's house? Probably. There likely wasn't a person in town who didn't. Her answer had been brief. Thanks. Hannah filled her lungs with sea air one last time, then turned and headed back to the house. 45 minutes later, she stepped into the office with a mug of filter coffee in one hand. So far, the commute to the mainland wasn't a problem, though that would likely change once more tourists began to arrive. The bridge was a bottleneck, and she remembered the backups from childhood. One of the old men from town used to take his desk chair to the end of the bridge, where he sat and glared at the drivers passing by. More lanes had been added to the bridge since then, but there was also more traffic, so she wasn't sure it had really made much difference. Eric came into the office just behind her. Thanks for the other night, she told him. He smiled. It really did feel like something had changed between them, though perhaps that was just because Hannah had finally relaxed. She had a tendency to make things unnecessarily complicated at times, but she didn't feel like she needed to explain herself now. Instead, Hannah made her way over to her desk to check her emails and the investigation log. She paused, still a few meters away. Leaning against her keyboard was a brown paper folder. She sat at the desk and stared down at it, eventually opening the cover and reading the top sheet. It was a copy of the report into the murder and robbery of Esther Jensen. Hannah had somehow managed to forget asking for it, possibly because she hadn't received any threats the day before. She was still convinced she needed to get to the bottom of what actually happened 16 years ago, but right now she needed to focus on the promise she had made to Rebecca, that she would find Joel's killer. Hannah opened the top drawer of her desk and placed the investigation report inside. The latest update to the investigation log was a report saying that the owner of the car that had been parked in Mockelmosen had finally called back. He had gone hiking for a few days with his phone switched off and had only realized something had happened on Sunday evening when he got back to the rest area and saw the flowers. After listening to the anxious voicemails from his mother, he had reached the messages from the police and immediately got in touch. He had nothing to add to the investigation, he said, and Hannah saw no reason to question that. At 8:10, she called Marcus Johansson. It was early, but she wanted to speak to him before the morning meeting. Hannah could hear voices in the background and assumed he must be at work. Hold on, he said. She heard him moving, the background noise growing quieter and eventually disappearing entirely as the door closed. Okay, how can I help? Did you think of anything else having to do with Joel? No. Any detail might be useful, even if you don't think it's important. I don't have anything else to tell you. How did you get those scratches on your car? The silence was filled by the sound of Marcus breathing, and Hannah's heart began to race. The man who had called to threaten her had upset her sense of calm. Did he really think she would just pack up and leave? What would he do once he realized she had every intention of staying? Karina and Daniel entered the office together, walking toward their end of the room. Daniel nodded to both Hannah and Eric, but Karina ignored her. Seeing Daniel gave Hannah a sudden pang of embarrassment. Why is that important? Marcus eventually asked. I'm afraid I can't say, he sighed. So a man lost his temper in the parking lot. He kicked the side mirror and then dragged something sharp again along the side. A key, maybe. I don't know. Why? Another pause. As it stretched out to several seconds, Hannah repeated the question gently, without any accusations. I have no idea, Marcus told her. It was dark, and he was drunk. I guess I'd done something to annoy him. Was this man Joel? Absolutely not. The force in his denial piqued her interest. Thanks, she said. I'm guessing we'll be in touch again.